Awesome. Hello, everyone, and a very good morning. Welcome to this live hands-on webinar on JFrog Xray. And before we get started, I did want to go over a few housekeeping items. So the webinar that you're looking at today is going to be recorded, and we will make the recording available to everyone. So if you want to follow along with today's demo, that's awesome. If you want to do it a little after we're done with the webinar, that's going to be totally okay too. So if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to use the Q&A panel. Either myself or the team here at JFrog will be able to provide answers for you. If we don't get to your question, though, we'll make sure that we do follow up. During the webinar, we'll have some time for Q&A, so we'll try to go over as much as possible. But if we don't, rest assured we will get back to you. And obviously, if you want to try everything yourself, just go visit jfrog.com/xray, and you'll be able to get a 30-day trial for JFrog Xray, the thing that we're going to be talking about today. So if you're wondering who that person is, who is your host today? Well, that's going to be me, Leon Stigter. I'm a developer advocate here at JFrog. Passionate about things like serverless containers and generally all things cloud. I love dad jokes, cheesecake, and APIs. And obviously, when it comes to serverless containers, cloud, when it comes to microservices, security is going to be incredibly important. So that is what we're going to be looking at today. So what we're going to do is essentially do four things. We're going to get you your instances so that you can follow along, or you can at least see how you can try everything out without downloading anything. We're going to do a quick intro to JFrog Xray, because during the events I've been at recently, we got a lot of questions on what is Xray, how does it work, and how can it help me. Then obviously the demo part, because we're going to look at a few of the use cases that Xray covers, and if we have time and if there are any questions, we'll obviously make sure that we leave some time for Q&A. So getting your instances and obviously making sure that you do not have to download anything. And specifically for that, we've created a website called try.jfrog.com. And if you go there, and I absolutely recommend you do that now, then you get a 4-day free environment, no questions asked, no charge, which spins up a complete installation of Artifactory, Xray, Jenkins, and essentially populates that with a bunch of data as well. So the way you do that is you go to try.jfrog.com, click on the Create an Account button, then fill in the details, and we promise not to spam you too much. I mean, we'll obviously follow up a bit on making sure that you have the right information. Then after you fill that in, then there is a button that lets you continue. You'll have to, unfortunately or fortunately for us at least, accept the user agreements, and then you get presented with a button that says Launch Test Drive. Now, the Launch Test Drive button essentially creates an environment on the Google Cloud Platform, and that's going to take about 5 minutes. So that is why, if you want to follow along, I absolutely recommend you're going to do that now. And after you're done, you will be provided in the log window with a bunch of URLs, including your username, your password, and as I said, the URLs to Artifactory, Xray, and Jenkins. So let's do a quick intro into JFrog Xray, as all the containers in the backend on GKE are spinning up. And I want to start off with a question. I mean, who is an optimist and who believes their code has no vulnerabilities whatsoever? I know that this isn't really a question that we put out there for you to answer, but at least when you ask this question to yourself, do you believe this is true? If you are an optimist and if you do believe that your code has no vulnerabilities whatsoever, awesome, I totally applaud you. But then again, I also think that might not be entirely true. So as you think about the incredible stuff that we built today, software essentially is like Russian dolls. I mean, services, apps, everything that we build, it tends to be upgraded faster than ever. And I mean, when you look at a ton of companies, and maybe all of the companies that are here in the webinar today, software is a core competency for them. However, for many other companies, such as financial services, automotive, food companies, software is not a core competence. And we often hear from our customers and from people that I meet that I really don't know what is inside my service. I hear developers talk about, yeah, we use a bunch of packages, whether it's a Python package, whether it is whether it's a Go module, whether it's something else. I'm not exactly sure what the license is. I'm not exactly sure what the vulnerabilities are that are associated with it. Essentially, I don't really know what is inside my app. And as we create more code, we also deploy more code. And that essentially has to do with a number of trends. And as you look at it, those trends are obviously related to DevOps. I mean, DevOps, the entire cycle is aimed to let us release faster. Looking at faster release cycles, faster deployments, and faster monitoring, making sure that you know what is going on, and obviously faster builds and faster tests, making sure that you can deploy many times a day. And I think I saw if I remember correctly, I saw a report very recently that talked about how many thousands, tens of thousands of times a day companies like Google, Netflix, and Amazon deploy to production. And it obviously comes with the fact that we now can build smaller components. I mean, the whole trend of building microservices and then putting that into a Docker container and running that on platforms like Kubernetes, whether that is a Kubernetes environment you own yourself as a company and run either on-prem or somewhere in the cloud, or whether it's you using a Kubernetes managed Kubernetes platform, something like GKE or Azure or AWS. The fact that we can build smaller components and make it easier to release obviously impacts the amount of releases that we can do. And function as a service, FaaS, obviously allows for more frequent deployments as well. I mean, the only thing that you have to take care of is obviously making sure that your API is consistent, so that other people can still call your function. Making sure that as you scale, as you grow, you can do those more frequent deployments. So, but what is in my app? And I mean, it's really important to know that, especially if you're running a multi-layer app. So, for example, and it's actually a question that came up during the last event that I was at. Why is it important that I run a multi-layer vulnerability scan on my Docker images? So, and we're actually going to do this in the demo as well, but just looking at this slide, let's review what a single application is, what a single Docker image is. And as it opens up, you can almost peel it back like an onion. I mean, we have the application, and that might consist of several containers. Those containers can host microservices, and every microservice that you deploy is going to have a bunch of packages. Now, each one of those packages might have some internal and external dependencies, and that is just a single application. I mean, what if you're part of a very large organization, an organization that has many applications, that has many services, many things that you deploy, many things that you need to take care about? You know what? As we're talking about this stuff, let's also talk a bit about trust. And do you trust your colleagues? And to be fair, if you're listening to this with your colleagues, or if you're in an organization where you have hopefully a bunch of colleagues, I really hope the answer is yes. I really hope that you do trust your colleagues. I mean, trust, especially within an organization, is incredibly important. And as you look at trust, I came across this amazing video of two water buffaloes at a river crossing that are trying to drink water. And they see this thing in the water, and they're wondering whether it's a crocodile or a log of wood. And I guess it's quite important for them to consider what it actually is before they drink that water, because it really is all about their survival. And of course, the lesson here is that in today's software development, as we use a ton of third-party software, and we don't know whether this package is safe or not, we probably want to do something about that. We probably want to know if this package that we're using is going to cause a data breach. We probably want to know whether it is whether it's safe to use, or whether it's actually ingesting a crypto mining facility into our code. And that is just from a code point of view. I mean, what from a license point of view? And I used to be a product manager, and one of the hardest things that I had to do was make sure that all of the licenses for all of the components that we were using were properly stored and sent to our legal team, so they could generate the end user license agreement for our technology. And as you're building out software that people use, and with that end user license agreement, you also realize that some licenses for some packages are just impossible to use. For example, LGPL is very hard to distribute. So trust not only is about is it safe to use the package? I mean, is there a vulnerability associated with it? But it's also all about is it allowed to be used? And if you trust all of your colleagues, what about the rest of the world? I mean, do you fundamentally trust that developer in the Netherlands? Do you trust that developer out in Australia that made that awesome package that you're going to use? And you know what? Maybe you do trust that person because maybe you've met that person, and that is awesome. But more likely than not, you're simply downloading a package from GitHub or from wherever it is that you get your packages from, and is that going to be safe? I mean, if you look at open source, and let's talk a bit about that. 98% of developers, I mean, 98% of the people here in this webinar, I would assume, is going to use open source tools at work. Whether it is their browser, whether it is something like a notepad or an editor like VS Code, 98% of developers use open source tools at work. I mean, I'm going to guess that the 2% that is not doing that either didn't realize that they're not using open source technology, or they're in such a highly regulated environment that they simply cannot use that. 96% of all commercial applications use open source as a component in their tech, and JFrog is no different in that. I mean, if you look at, for example, Artifactory runs on a Tomcat platform, and Tomcat is bundled into it. So we absolutely use a ton of open source software in our own products. So we are definitely part of that 96%. And most of the companies that I talk to on a daily basis, and most of the people I meet, all have commercial applications that bundle open source software. And 79% of businesses are adopting open source technology for key roles. So think about this. I mean, not too long ago, we had companies that were so averse of using open source software that nothing would come in unless it was built by that company themselves, or if it was purchased from an existing company. But now almost 4 in every 5 companies is using open source technology for their mission critical systems. I mean, the things that if they go down, that company just can potentially go out of business. It is so incredible to see how much of open source technology is being used at different companies. So how can JFrog Xray help? I mean, this is obviously the whole thing that we're talking about. And I try to lay it out in sort of a circle, and it obviously starts with code, with IDE integration, and with composition analysis. I mean, if you go to the JFrog Confluence page, jfrog.com/confluence, where we have all our information, you'll actually see that there are a bunch of plugins for IDEs like Visual Studio. We just launched the integration for Eclipse, where you can have integration with Xray. So from within your IDE, developers can now see whether or not it is safe to use or allowed to use a certain package. From within the build, CI integration, policy management, and obviously failing builds on critical violations. And this is literally the stuff that we're going to be looking at in a lot more detail. So I'm going to skip this section for now. Distribution and download blocking, and I'll show you a bit on how download blocking works. But essentially, what it means is that if you're using Artifactory, and if you as a company say that you cannot use specific licenses, or you cannot use any components that have critical vulnerabilities, or essentially any CVE score that you want to associate with it, then make sure the developer can never download that onto their development machine. Then obviously from a runtime point of view, making sure that you have a full impact analysis map, and that is incredibly important as you're running more microservices. I mean, if you just run a single application, then it's relatively easy to say that if something's impacted, your application is going to be impacted. But what if you have 10,000 Docker containers running? What if you have 100,000 serverless functions running? How are you going to be able to say this package is used in this and this component, so those are the ones I need to update, and the rest is going to be safe? And monitoring, I mean, all of the data in the world is awesome, but if you have no reports on it, if you cannot learn from it, then it's essentially completely useless. It's incredibly important to be able to see what's happening and to be able to take action on what you see. So how does it work? I mean, what does Xray actually do? How can you go from scanning a package or scanning something, going into making sure that people are not using it? And essentially, the diagram that you see here on the screen today covers most of how that works. So as soon as Artifactory has artifacts to scan, it will trigger a scan job in Xray. Xray will unpack everything. So if you have a Docker container with a Java app, and in that Java app you use a jar file, and in that jar file is a zip file, and in that zip file is a zip file, we will actually unpack everything to its lowest level and scan that, so that you can be absolutely sure that we do the deepest recursive scanning possible. And then we'll look at things like versions, like security, like licenses, making sure that you can go to production trusting the app that you have, knowing what you have inside of your app. So as you can see on the external metadata sources, there is a section for external vulnerability providers, making sure that we obviously work with the best in class of tools. And one of those things we actually announced earlier this year, where we announced a partnership with a company called Risk-Based Security, or RBS. And they have an amazing database of about 90,000 or so vulnerabilities that exist within software. And that's a lot more than any other database out there. So we're extremely, extremely happy that we work with the team there to power Xray. So anything ranging from the existing CVEs in the NIST database to things that are reserved but do not show up there yet are actually available in that database, and thus in Xray. Because that database essentially comes with Xray free of charge. And to me, as a Dutchman, getting things for free is absolutely the best way of getting it. So you know what? Let's actually go over some live action. And if you are going to follow along, then and if you sign up for try.jfrog.com by now, your instance should be spun up. And we're actually going to look at the PDF, or we're going to walk through a part of the PDF that you've seen. So let me go into to Xray, and obviously, as I want to do that, I'll have to share my screen, so I'm going to share. And if everything went okay now, you should be able to see my screen. So right now I'm in Xray, and if everything's okay, I'm still logged in. That's awesome. So you know what? Let's actually look at the few bits and pieces that Xray has. So right here, I can see my recent violations, and as we go through the demo, we'll see actually new ones pop up, recent vulnerabilities that come in from those external data sources. I can see how many Artifactory instances this is connected to, and it's just the one that comes with this demo. I can see how many components there are in Artifactory, and that's about 2.7 thousand of them. So that's quite a lot. And here on the side, I have a bunch of things. So admin, obviously, is the admin stuff. We'll go over reports a bit later. And let's actually look at these top three things: watches, policies, components. So watches, as the name implies, actually looks at different resources. So it will perform scans as something happens. So for example, and we'll look at this in detail in a sec, this watcher called step 1 create application war file will actually look at, we'll actually look at the builds going through, or the builds with this particular name. And that's a build that will be triggering in a few seconds. Now, every watcher has a bunch of policies associated with them. And as you can see here, all of them are around security. So if I look at the step 1 create application waterfall security policy, and I click on that, you can see that there is a security rule. So policies have a bunch of rules that, and I'll click on it, show you that do things depending on what happens. So a security rule can either have a minimal severity, and in this case, I set it to trigger on all severities whatsoever. I could have set, you know, a trigger on a specific CVSS score. And when that happens, what should it do? It will automatically generate a violation, so that in that first screen that we saw, we can see that a violation has popped up. What I could do is trigger a webhook and, you know, send that data to an alerting system, or maybe to some other system that helps me notify. I could absolutely send emails. So I could say, you know what, send it to my chief information security officer. Make sure that, because it's a security rule, make sure that that someone knows about this. Now, there are two other things that I find very interesting, which is obviously the block download. So if I do this as things come into Artifactory, I can actually say no other user whatsoever is going to be able to look at or to download this. And my personal favorite, fail build, because, you know, I kind of don't want to have any unsafe stuff in my production environment. So that's the policy part. Yes, I'm going to discard any changes because I didn't make any. And then we can look at components. So we can look at all the different things that were scanned. We can see the type of thing. So for example, this is an Ubuntu one where it scanned the libxslt in a specific build. And as I click on that, it shows me a bunch of things. So it shows me where it comes from, the latest version, when it was created, and it shows me all of the security issues that are associated with it. So you know what? Let's actually see that in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to Jenkins, and I'm going to look at the first one, the create application war file, which in essence is going to, and I obviously have to log in, which will essentially create the war file. So I'm going to do a build with parameters, server URL, great. Xray scan, absolutely, because this is what I want to do. And it's going to do a bunch of things. So it's going to build, so essentially gathering the data from Artifactory, It's making sure that because it's going to do a few Gradle steps, and we'll look at that in a second. And after that, it's going to publish the build information and obviously scan the artifacts so that I know what is in my build. Because I just did this the other day, that stuff is going to build. So let's actually see what happens. So we'll go to the console output, skip down, and the Gradle build daemon died unexpectedly. So that is slightly annoying because that obviously always happens during demos. Luckily, I have a bunch of other builds prepared as well. So you know what? Let's look at this one real quick. And as I scroll down, you can actually see what's happening. So this is the part where Artifact or where Xray does a scan. And right now it says that build number 96 was scanned. One alert was generated, so I can click on this and actually go to Artifactory and see what all happened. I can actually do that in Xray as well. So let me go in and look at. Do a search again. Oh. There it is. URL is always tricky. So I can see what all are the security violations that were in here. So for example, I can see that there is an improper input validation with a proper CVE number, which is a medium risk, and I can see the component that it's in. So in this case, it's struts. Struts 2 number version 2314, and if you are here in the US, then you might realize this is the exact one that caused a bunch of security breaches earlier last year. I can see again all the security violations. I can see the licenses, and this is really interesting when you consider it from a compliance point of view, because I can actually see all the different license types that are in here. So, for example, I could say, and we'll look at this in a few seconds, that you know what, BSD licenses. I am not too okay with that as a company. I will not allow anyone to use BSD licenses. To be fair, that would be slightly awkward because most of the software that's being built today is either Apache, MIT, or BSD license. But we'll look at how you would set up a license violation policy. But the cool thing is, and skipping back to violations for a sec, as I click on the component, it will actually show me all of the locations where I got it from and where it's being used and how many times it's being used. So I can see that right now there are 58 occurrences of this exact package within my Docker stage local. I can look at the ancestors and the descendants, so making sure that I can see where it's coming from. So right now I can see that I've built a web service in Java, version 112 a bunch of times, and all of them have this specific version of struts, so they will have this very specific vulnerability. And if I look at it, I can see all of the individual builds that it was part of. I can even go down and see where in the Docker layers this one was created. So I can, for example, if I look at this is another build. Build number 19, right click, view component details. I can see what is happening. I can see what, for this specific build, were all the vulnerabilities and all the license issues that were found. So how do you find those licenses? And we'll actually do that creating a policy first. So I'm going to create a new policy, and instead of security, it's actually going to be a license policy. So I'll call this my my banned license policy. I'm going to leave the description blank for now because the name is relatively self-sufficient. I'm going to add a new rule, and right here, I'll call it banned licenses. So instead of doing allowed licenses, I'm actually going to say, you know what, banned. And the ones I do not appreciate of or not allow are going to be the LGPL ones, and I can either select them all individually or just do a select all here. And I'm also not completely okay with the CPAL license, which traditionally is a very safe license to use. So I'm using that as well. And right now I have selected 14 licenses that if they would ever be in my in the thing that I'm going to scan, and I'm actually going to scan a build, that that it will alert me of that. It's going to generate a high violation simply because it is incredibly important for my legal team to know this. And I'm going to fill the build so that I'm going to be sure that as soon as this rule is triggered and there is a violation, that nothing will go to production. Add rule, that's awesome. Then I obviously need to save. Now I'm going to create a watcher. So as I create my policies, they don't take effect yet. I need to associate them with a watcher. So I'm going to create a new watch, and I'll call this my my license watcher. It's going to be enabled because that's kind of important. And here I can manage my resources. So what are the things that it should look at? I could say, for example, look at all the repositories I have in Artifactory. I could say, look at all the builds that are going on. So that's actually a good idea. That's actually what I want to do right now. So I want to look at all the builds and make sure that stuff isn't going to go into production without me being okay with the license. So assign, and then I obviously have to select the policy. So what is my watcher going to enforce? And in this case, it is the banned license policy, and I can either drag and drop it over or select it and click this, but I'll just drag and drop because that's just what I like. Click assign and then click create. So right now, my license watcher is going to be active and is going to make sure that whenever I have a banned license, that it's going to fail the build. So let's open up a new tab, jfrog.local port 8080, which is the Jenkins one. And you know what? I'm just going to create a Docker container built with parameters. Do an Xray scan, build. And as we're waiting for this build to complete, let me actually show you what is in there. So let's go to the configure stage. You obviously see a bunch of credentials and stuff, but the important thing here is the pipeline script. And we chose to do it with Groovy, and as you go into whatever it is that you want to do, you can choose pretty much any language that you want. I mean, you can even use the JFrog CLI, which has a command to trigger an Xray scan, and even use the output of the scan in deciding what needs to happen. So the important thing here is obviously capture the build information, so we can send that to Artifactory, and here is the important thing. So here is the Xray scan part. And you'll see a few things. So if Xray scan is set to yes, which is the parameter that I just changed from no to yes, then it will look at Xray. And there is a thing here called fail build set to false. What that means is that no matter what kind of policies I have set to fail my builds, all of my builds will succeed. So if I wanted to make sure that the build actually failed, I had to change this from false to true, and in that case, the fail build will take into effect. Something that if you're playing around with Xray and Artifactory together, especially with pipeline scripts, this is something that comes up quite a lot. So I'll just save for now. Look at everything that's happening. Xray scan is nearly complete, and after that, it's going to promote it from one Artifactory repository into another. It's going to take a few seconds simply because, we need to make sure that we scan everything recursively. And because this is a Docker container, it has to do a bunch of things. So it has to, as I said, look at all the individual layers that make up a Docker container. It has to unpack the WAR file that's going in there. It has to look at all the individual jar files that exist within my application, and after that, it also has to take care of generating that entire suite of potential security vulnerabilities. And I say potential, but I actually already know what the result's going to be. There are going to be a bunch of violations. So let me click on the build, go to console output. And there are so many security violations in here that it doesn't even show me the full log. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go into Xray. I'll go to home, and right now I can see here all of the security violations that have taken place. So I'm going to click on this build, which is the last build that we did, as you can see by the time. So it's done a bunch of things. It looked at different license types, and as it looks at it found 53 different license types. So as we go back, you could see that it found so many that is actually blowing up my my entire recent violations. So there are so many in there that's actually still pending the resolution of all of those things. So you could see there are a bunch of different types of violations: lows, medium, highs, and I hope that it actually added the license violation. So not yet, but as it takes a bit of time. As it scans through everything and delivers the results, you can actually see that this will turn into high violations, and you'll see a bunch of violations that are not just security, but that are also absolutely related to licenses. So in like a 20-minute or so overview, these are the most important things that you need to know about Xray. So the things that we did is we looked at policies, and I created a bent license policy. In the same way, I could have created a security policy where I said, you know what, the minimum should be a medium, and in that case, it gets triggered. And what I could do is a trigger webhook that says, you know what, send this information to a reporting dashboard or whatever. We looked at creating watches, and in this case, I had one license watcher. The thing I didn't talk about yet was calculate. So as I do that, I can see of all the scans that it did, there are 3 violations in here. Which is absolutely useful to know, so that in like one swoop overview, I can see what is happening. We looked at the recent violations. We looked at the recent vulnerabilities, and obviously the recent packages. So the stuff that comes in, the stuff that's being scanned. What's the highest violation that we found with it? Now, the thing I didn't talk about yet, which I absolutely promised to do, so I'll definitely go over that a bit, is the reports. So what I can do is I can generate a license report, and that will tell me about all the stuff that has been going on. So I can see that I had about 35% of everything that was scanned was the Apache 2 license. I can see that 7% or 33 components had a GPL license and so on. And I can see from a license compliance point of view, how did that impact us? Going back, I can do the absolute same thing for security. So let's look at this for a bit. And I can see that especially a few weeks ago, around March, was incredible with the amount of vulnerabilities that we've imported, and that kind of makes sense because that was when my my demo image started to get and scan new vulnerabilities. So that's when it reached its peak. If you look at the recent components, that obviously is a lot higher here, simply because that's when we do the demo. And I can look at the different types of artifacts. So, for example, I have a Docker app with 183 security violations, which is not even the highest, because apparently this component over here has a bunch more, which is the Maven generator for data. So I can actually click on them and see what all vulnerabilities that they have, and obviously that could bring me back to the actual vulnerability as well. So in a quick overview, this is essentially what happens. If you have signed up for try.jfrog.com, then there's going to be a PDF there, which essentially walks you through the exact same thing that I've done today as well. So with that, let's actually go back to sort of the slides and make sure that we touch on the Q&A a bit. But before we do that, and I promised this to our events manager, I did want to plug what's going on at JFrog. And obviously, if you've been following along with our Twitter, we've won 2 of the DevOps Dozen Awards. One for Best DevOps Executive, which I'm proud to say is our CEO, Shlomi Ben Chaim. And we won the Best DevOps Commercial Solution for JFrog Artifactory. But obviously, the thing that I really want to talk about is SwampUp, which we're doing from June 17 to 19 here in San Francisco. It's actually going to be one of the most amazing events that I've been at. So go to swampup.jfrog.com, check it out, see the awesome speakers that we have lined up. And with that, some obvious ads. So tweet us at JFrog, tweet me at Leon Stigter if you have any comments, feedback, suggestions on what we should do next. And with that, I'm actually going to look at the Q&A. So I'm gonna start off here with the first question that I see. Is there a task to do a JFrog Xray scan from Azure DevOps? So we're actually working with the Azure DevOps team to make sure that that Artifactory and Xray are even more tied into the Azure DevOps suite. But for now, what you can absolutely do is use the JFrog CLI. So the JFrog CLI actually has a command that will allow you to scan, and if you have the CLI with you, that is actually JFrog space RT space build -scan, or BS, which may or may not have been the best acronym that we've ever chosen, but that will allow you to perform an Xray scan on the build using the JFrog CLI. So super useful for things if you're using a build system, a CI server that doesn't yet have a JFrog plugin yet. Second one, when using containers, what is recommended to scan the application or build the container and scan the entire container? To be fair, I would actually say both. I really want to make sure that I scan my application and make sure that there is nothing in my app that is going to either be a license issue or a security issue. And as I build it into a Docker container, then I also want to make sure that the combination of my app and the container, and probably the container itself as well, don't pose any threats. So as you're looking at the 3 Jenkins pipelines that we've created for you on try.jfrog.com, you'll actually see 3 different pipelines. One that creates the app and does a scan, one that looks at the Docker image, and one that essentially assembles my app by collecting the app that was already scanned and the Docker image that was already scanned, and then performing a 3rd scan. So instead of doing either or, I would absolutely look at and. And one thing that just triggered me is that when you do a scan, what we'll actually do is very similar to Artifactory. We look at checksums. So if we've already scanned a specific checksum, then that checksum doesn't have to go through the entire scan, because if the checksum is the same, the artifact is going to be the same. And in that case, we know what the status is. So let me look at a few more questions. So how does build integration work if you use something else for builds than Jenkins, such as TFS? Absolutely great question. So in that case, I would absolutely recommend to use the JFrog CLI. And as I just mentioned, the JFrog CLI has a scan build command, which is JFrog RT build scan or BS, depending on if you want to do the full length version or the acronym of the command. And that allows you to integrate it with literally any build system, or even if you don't use a build system, use it on your machine itself. So this one is this particular instance of build fail. We need to modify the pipeline script in a scenario where we have a geographically distributed small team controlling their own pipeline scripts. Would it be suggested to block downloads of build artifacts from Artifactory? Absolutely. So when other teams are in control of their own pipelines, which probably is a good idea anyway, you really want to make sure that the artifacts that they get from Artifactory are valid. And with valid, I mean obviously valid licenses, but also that they don't contain any security vulnerabilities that your company is not going to be okay with. So really making sure that that the stuff you do is compliant with your company's policies. All disapproved unless the library is on a particular list. So it's actually part of a two-question piece. Rather than a blanket disapproval, is it possible to set up things that says something like a blanket disapproval unless it's on a specific list? Absolutely. So what I could do is I could disallow any components other than the ones that, and this obviously especially works within in the license part. I can say I want to disapprove everything, especially the ones that do not have a license, because in that case I don't know what's going on. But I'm only going to allow stuff that either has an MIT license or a BSD license or any type of license that you're going to be okay with. And I just use the BSD and MIT ones because those are the ones that are generally speaking relatively safe. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal person, so please check with your CISO and your legal representative at your company before you set up any of those rules. And then I'm going to take one last question, because I also want to be respectful of your time. How can we create a notice report file, either JSON or text format, so that we can include it as part of the product build? So actually, especially when you do the when you use the CLI, it will actually output everything nicely in a JSON format. It will tell you about literally everything that went on. From a security point of view, you can just use the APIs that exist within Xray to do that as well. And we keep track of every build that was scanned or every artifact that was scanned within Xray as well. So you can always go back to Xray, and you can always go back to Artifactory to look at that. So I think that actually covers most questions, and I have to say I think the questions that we had today were awesome. So I'm very happy that there was such an awesome interactive session between you all listening and me sitting here with all my friends, just answering questions, looking at the Q&A. So with that, I thank you all so much for being here. I hope you learned something. I mean, especially learned a lot from listening to your questions. I want to say thank you again, and I hope to see you all during our next webinar here at JFrog.